Hi, just to make sure, I'm Joseph, she's Jasmine. Okay, just so yeah. We're real psychologists, and there's an important reason why we're here today. I'd like to start with this quote from Francois Truffaut. It says, "No one in their right mind would actually go out and try to practice surgery without practicing this for years. But there are two things that everyone thinks that they're born as experts in, and that's sex and talking about films." We would like to add talking about psychology to that. As psychologists, we were sitting and watching the talks yesterday, and we're cringing a number of times. Psychology is an interesting topic. People like to talk about it, but we were hearing things that were just wrong, just incorrect. There are also things that we listened to, and we would have liked to believe them, but we couldn't because we found no basis for us to believe these things. And so this isn't the first conference that we've confronted this at, and we were trying to figure out why, and I have an idea which came to me under the shower this morning. I think one of the problems that we have is the language that we use. There is a psychological phenomenon which is known as linguistic priming, which means when you hear certain words, you associate certain things with them. So, and there's something about the language that we use. So if I say ecological validity, she recognizes that. Okay, this is our secret language. Now, if I say the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, we both look and say, okay, let's go back to the textbook and look at that, because that was something from our lecture in neuroscience. But if we say something like psychological safety, wow, that's something, those are two words, you've heard both of them. Psychology, okay, that has something to do with people and their brains, and safety, we all know about that. So people hear these words and they think, oh, I know what that is, and I'm going to actually go out and talk about it. The thing is that psychological safety for us is as clearly defined term as ecological validity is, or as a dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this is one of the problems that we've noticed, is that people are talking about things that they don't quite understand what it is. So how do we go about solving this problem? There was a question that came up to one of the speakers yesterday about how do you differentiate between fact and opinion? Well, one of the ways to do that is to ask an expert, right? If you talk to somebody about medical things and he gives you some advice and tells you things, you would expect to ask him where he did his medical training at. If somebody talks to you about psychology, even worse, if somebody starts offering you therapy or coaching and stuff, you might want to ask where they did their training as a psychologist and where they did their training as a therapist. But we've noticed that psychology, yeah, it's a cool subject. That's why we studied it. We also noticed that there's been this trend. So a secret. If you want to get a talk accepted at a conference, especially an agile conference, all you need to do is use either psycho, neuro, or cognitive in the title of your talk, and you'll get accepted, because everybody likes to hear about that. So actually, this got us so bothered that we started doing something which we call the psychoneurocognitive buzzword bingo slam. And we actually did this at Craft last year, where we said, why don't we get all these words that people are talking about but don't really understand what they are? You know, they're throwing the buzzwords around. And we spent 45 minutes with people throwing these words at us and us explaining to them what they really mean. And this was actually the words that we looked at. You'll probably recognize some of these: cognitive bias, empathy, 7 ± 2, MBTI, Tuckman, emotional intelligence, neurodiversity, all these things. And said, okay, why don't we really spend some time talking about a couple of these that are buzzwords, but are also things that we, as researchers, actually do research on. So we want to talk to you about two topics today that we are actually doing research on to get you to understand what this stuff really is. And that's one of the reasons I brought Jasmine along. Jasmine is Germany's leading expert in psychological safety. Okay? And what she's going to say is based on fact and not opinions about talking to people about what they think that these two terms are. Have fun, and then you'll have to put up with me afterwards. Yeah.
So, Oh.
Hi.
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 Well, psychological safety. First of all, I'm really honored to be here. It's an amazing stage to be talking on, and it's an amazing audience, and I had great discussions yesterday about psychological safety, but also about other things. So I love to be on conferences, and I love to be challenged on conferences to get my thinking going. Psychological safety has been my passion for the past 6 years. And why has it been my passion? Because I've always worked in teams or have been forced to work in teams. And that goes back to my school. I've been in a very, very modern school, and they put teamwork into our curriculum. So as students, we were supposed to learn how to work in a team. Yay for that. I think it's amazing for a school to put that into a curriculum. But what happened was how we were expected to learn to work in teams was by just working in teams. So we were assigned to teams, group of people, group of students, sometimes 2 students, or we could choose to be one, and we would do those assignments and those learning assignments together. And there were 2 patterns that emerged. The one pattern was that I would take all the work and I would do it, and then I would teach my peers what I learned. The outcome was fairly okay. My peers would learn something, I would learn something, we were all happy. And the second pattern was we would split the work, and each and every one of us would do parts of the work, and then we would try to combine it in the end. The outcome wasn't that great, because the combination didn't work in the end, and we only learned a small part of it. Now, within my professional career, I saw those 2 patterns with Scrum teams as well, especially with Scrum teams, because I work with Scrum teams. They do that as well. Either we have a high achiever who does plenty of things and some others who do some work to support him, or they split things into little chunks and then try to combine it, and it doesn't work in the end. And that led me to the question of asking myself, well, is great teamwork something that happens by chance? Because education seems to think that we can learn how to work in a team just by doing it. And organization seems to think that we can learn to work in a team just by doing it. And I saw it working, and I saw it not working. And then I thought to myself, well, I have to take even a step more back and ask myself, what is actually a team? What do we need as a team to be working? And that led me to the definition of what is a team. So a bunch of people happening to work together isn't essentially a team. A bunch of people happening to work together is a bunch of people happening to work together. But in order to be a team, we need to be interdependent. And that is something we can work on as coaches. So do we have a common goal or a common purpose that actually really requires us to work together? Or can we reach that common goal or purpose working as individuals? Because then we can spare the teamwork, because teamwork is really hard work. Second thing is the common goal or purpose. That's something we can work on as coaches as well. If the goal of our team is to make money for the company, we're probably doomed. Because that's not very motivating, and it's not what we really do. So probably the company has some goal that we should understand and a purpose we should understand. And the derivative of our goal as a team is what we can do as a team to help fulfill that goal as well. And I love the last definition. Teamwork is a cooperative process that allows ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So celebrate extraordinary things that we do as a team. Now that I had the definition of what is a team, I already had a few pieces I could work on with my teams. I worked on goals, I worked on being interdependent, and we did find some other definitions of the work we did, or we needed to redefine the work we did in order to really work as a team. Then I went on and went back into literature and asked myself the question, but then, okay, what's the difference between those good teams I see and those great teams I see? Is there a pattern? And as probably most of you, I read about Google, doing the researching their teams, what's the difference between good and bad teams within Google, and one of the factors they found out was psychological safety. Now, I can't really tell you anything about the Google research because I only know what the internet tells me, and I haven't seen the numbers, I haven't seen the data they actually worked on. But there is more research on it. Psychological safety has been discovered in the 60s. And it has been discovered as one of the key factors that help individuals to go on with change by Shine and Bennis. In the 90s, Kahneman said that individuals who feel psychologically safe do show more engagement at work. And then Amy Edmondson came end of the 90s, and she studied medical teams and studied what actually makes the difference there. And she said, well, psychological safety is actually the key factor that helps teams to go from good to great. So there is a pattern there. So research shows that the key factor of good team performance is psychological safety. And research shows that if I write research shows, people believe me more. I went on trying to get that term psychological safety a little bit more firm for myself, because I mean, yes, everybody knows what psychology is supposed to mean, and everybody knows what safe is supposed to mean, but what does it mean if you combine those two words? What is the definition of it? That's the definition of Edmondson. It's a shared belief that held by the members of the team that it's safe to take interpersonal risk. So that it's safe to speak out. It's safe to be myself. Now that is a little bit more firm for myself. And I went on into the agile community talking about psychological safety, and there were a lot of misconceptions that I heard. Some people confuse psychological safety for comfort. So some teams say, well, no, I can't work with that other team because I don't feel safe working with them. So we can only work as our team. Then I say to my teams, like, that's not psychological safety. That's comfort. You don't feel comfortable working with that other team. So we can work on getting a safe environment for all of us. But that's not what psychological safety is really about. Psychological safety is also not harmony. It's not the lack of tension. If we don't have tension, we don't need a concept for it. It's rather what enables us to deal with tension, what enables us to deal with disharmony. And it's also not workplace safety. That's something else. So now let me dig a little bit deeper into what are the benefits of psychological safety? Why is it so important? There are 3 levels we could talk about: the individual, the organizational, and also the team level. On the individual level, research shows us that, as I said, we show more engagement. We feel more vital, which helps us to be more creative. Again, if we want people to be able to embrace change, they need to be creative, because change is about being creative and opening that space of where we could go. And it promotes learning, because we voice more, we speak up more, and if we speak up more, we learn more. On an organizational level, it's a lot harder to research on, because there are so many factors that interfere. But Baer and Fraser were able to show that it actually also helps with the organizational performance and with the organizational learning. Now, the slide that comes is the worst slide we will see in my talk, because there has been a lot of research on team level. And I will just pick a few. So we heard about diversity yesterday, and I'm pretty new into the diversity topic. Diversity is really, really important for the world nowadays, because we are on our limits. Oh, that was wrong. We are on our limits of what we can achieve in the small space where we are. So if a team feels psychologically safe, they are able to regard diversity as a bonus, as something that helps them, rather than something they just have to deal with because, well, we just couldn't find any Swiss programmer, so we had to take one from Asia or whatever. Or we couldn't find any other male, so we had to take a female. If they feel safe, they will regard that diversity that the new person brings into the team as something that is good for the team. And it also helps us to embrace change. And embrace change when we lose status, which happens quite a lot in the agile world. Because we're changing our organization from being quite hierarchical, from everybody has an identity defined by a role I'm doing. I'm an architect. I'm a front-end developer. I'm the designer. And then all of a sudden I'm in a Scrum team and I'm part of the Scrum team. That's not a lot of identity. If I have psychological safety within my team, I'm much more likely to deal with that fact easier than if not. Now, if something is really powerful, I ask myself the question, there has to be a dark side of it. There has to be a downside. Every powerful thing has a downside, and it has. So teams with high level of psychological safety are more likely to engage in unethical behavior. For example, corruption within the police department. Police departments or teams within police tend to have a high amount of psychological safety, which leads to more can lead to more corruption. Or Enron is another example for that unethical behavior that can happen if teams feel very safe. And research also showed us that even a small level of dishonesty can be very contagious and spread within that team. But there is also some other research that showed that with good ethical leadership and good role modeling, I can reduce the effects of this. So now I'm a former HR girl. So my thoughts were, okay, if psychological safety is so important, we could do an organizational program that our organizational culture fosters psychological safety and the problem is solved. Unfortunately, there is no correlation between organizational culture and team psychological safety. So next approach, I'll just hire people who tend to feel psychologically safe and then I have it in the team as well, so I don't have to deal with it. Unfortunately, yet again, there is no correlation between personality traits and psychological safety, except for neuroticism, which has a negative correlation. So psychological safety is something I have to work on with each and every team. And the research doesn't really give me a lot of answers on how can I really work on psychological safety with my team, especially when we work with Scrum teams and we just have to get the delivery out. Can I really deal with psychological safety there? How can I deal with psychological safety there? That was my next question. So the next 4 slides that you will see, those are hypotheses that I have that help me within my work, and I try to gather data together to prove or disprove them. So my first step is I'll start measuring. I would also ask you to start measuring. If you're a psychologist and you can get access to questionnaires, there are good questionnaires by Amy Edmondson, for example, so you could get access to those. If you're not, there are 2 easy tricks that I would like to suggest you could do. The one is those cool-off conversation after meetings. I love those. So if we are in a meeting where I feel there was tension, I tend to have cool-off conversation with certain individuals in the meeting. And if they expose a lot more information than they did in the meeting, I know that we have an issue with psychological safety. The second thing is I love that retrospective activity where I've asked people how safe do you feel on a scale from 1 to 10 and let them vote anonymously and then put it on the wall. That gives me just some basic insight. It's very important that it's anonymous because otherwise they won't tell you the truth, obviously. Second thing is create awareness and start creating awareness for yourself. So start creating awareness how you feel towards the members of that team. Which ones do you like and which ones don't you like? That's a really, really hard question to ask oneself, or it goes very against my beliefs because I want to like all my team members, but sometimes I don't. Which team members do I include and which do I exclude? Do I actually exclude team members? Most times I do. If I'm really honest with myself, at the end of the day, I'm not that inclusive all the time. Do I trust my team members? And can I really be myself in that team? If you created awareness of yourself, start create awareness in your team, start talking about it. Start talking about the team norms you actually have in your team. So I love to start my teams off with a team agreement or a team charter. And I revise that every 3 to 4 months. It's not something we do and put on a wall. It's something we revise. Third step, be a role model. Start facilitating each and every meeting you're in. Start asking the quiet team member what he or she thinks. Start saying thank you. And start also to celebrate your own failure. If you want people to learn from mistakes, you have to first start as a role model and learn from your own mistakes and tell people which those mistakes were and what you learned about it. And the fourth comes out of complexity theory. Create an environment where people can get to know each other. So shared space, shared container, shared context. That might be a pizza night for some teams. That might be some meetings where you bring food and really discuss and get to know each other. That's the first step. Joseph always said that trust is the currency of our interactions, but trust can only emerge if you know the person you're talking to. Now I would like to finish with one quote I love. It's about group emotional intelligence, and group emotional intelligence has been shown to be really closely linked to psychological safety. And Duskett and Wolf said that group emotional intelligence is about small acts that make the big difference. So that's really about encouraging you to start to really invest in those really small acts. It's about saying thank you when somebody worked the whole night. It's about acknowledging when there is a false harmony, when there is a false tension, and about speaking about it and doing something about it. It's about treating others with respect as humans. And I think that's something we can do, each and every one of us can do, in order to make us help to embrace change more and to change the world of work for the better.
Thanks. A word of warning, the slides go down in quality from here. Okay. Have you ever noticed that you get a group of really good, really smart people together and expect this is going to be a great team, and then they act like a bunch of idiots? See, we know that. We're Swiss, and our national football team does this all the time. So one of the things that I research is what makes a team intelligent, what makes a team smart. Because we presume that there's a correlation between group intelligence and performance on the tasks that a team has to do. So in order to do that, one of the things that we do as psychologists is we work with the field of psychometrics. What psychometrics is figuring out how to analyze what we call a latent construct. A latent construct is something that you can't directly measure. So we can measure how high Jasmine is, we can measure how much she weighs. Okay. But we can't directly measure how smart she is. We can't directly measure how she's feeling. Things like intelligence, things like depression, anxiety, are what we call latent constructs. Also, if you think about it, agility is also a latent construct. How do we measure whether a team is agile or not? Psychological safety is also a latent construct. How can we measure that? Yes, as psychologists, we have access to certain tools and instruments that you don't, but still part of the psychometric process is how do we design these instruments? So the three things that we look at here are the dimensionality of it. Intelligence used to be thought as a unidimensional construct. lately, psychologists tend to think of it that we have different types of intelligence. We have spatial intelligence, we have mathematical intelligence, things like that. How do we measure this construct? Reliability. If we test people again and again on the same test, will we get exactly the same results? And validity. Are we actually measuring what we think we're measuring? Okay? So collective intelligence, Anita Woolley and her colleagues at MIT and Harvard came up with the idea that since we have a measure of general intelligence for the individual, there might be one that we can measure for groups, and there might be a correlation between the two of them. So one of the first things they found out is that collective intelligence is not correlated with individual intelligence. Okay, this is the psychologist now. That is just an opinion unless I show the data for it. Okay? The data for it says that G, up at the top, that's general intelligence. Individual intelligence, R on the outside, is the product moment correlation, also known as Pearson's R. So how is general intelligence related to C, which is group intelligence? So what they looked at was the average intelligence of a group and the maximum intelligence, the IQ of the smartest person in the group. And they found out that the correlation between that, the average intelligence of a group and the group intelligence, was 0.19 on a scale of -1 to +1. That's insignificant correlation. The correlation between the maximum intelligence, the smartest person in the group, was 0.27, so a bit more, but also not very much. What's even more interesting is when they looked at how does individual intelligence contribute to performance on the tests, what they found out was that it was even worse. Average intelligence correlated very badly, and what's even more interesting is that if you have somebody really smart there, the group performance decreases down to 0.13. So what is collective intelligence related to? It's positively correlated to three things: social perceptiveness, or empathy within the group; equality and conversational turn-taking, which is a measure of psychological safety; and gender diversity, which is the number of women in the team have a direct correlation to the intelligence of the team. That's why I have Jasmine here, because I'm a lot more smarter than I would be alone. So how do we go about measuring empathy? There are two general tests we use. One is the NEO-FFI, five-factor inventory. The other one is Baron Cohen's reading the mind in the eyes test. Let me just show you a sample of that. Take a look at this gentleman's eyes, and which feeling or emotion do you think he's having? You can take a guess. He's panicked, just so you know. I'm just showing a couple things just for you to get the feeling of the type of tests we use, but this is not at the level where we have to do informed consent or something. Okay, now the interesting thing about testing is this test-retest reliability. And this is a big issue for us, because one thing that we found is that if you do a test again and again, you actually get better at it for certain tests. Also, this is the reason why there are certain test instruments that we have that you can't get. Has anyone seen that video of the 6 college students who throw basketballs with each other, and then in the middle a gorilla walks through? All seen that, right? Damn, I paid $600 back in 2005 for a license to use that in my training. It's now up on YouTube. This is what happens when you get access to our tools. But one of the things that I'm looking at is how can I develop tools that you can use without having to qualify as a psychologist, okay? So one of the things that we look at is, yes, we say this team works well together. Think about that statement. This team works well together. What do they work well together at? Can you define that? Well, there's a number of things that they work well together, and McGrath analyzed this and said there are 4 general things. The team needs to be able to generate new ideas. They need to be able to choose between different alternatives. They need to be able to negotiate consensus, and they need to be able to execute on this. So even the fact that we only have 10 minutes or so left, I really would like to do at least one exercise with you. So I'm going to give you just a minute's time on this to try this exercise. Get something to write with. You're going to need this, okay? This is one of the tests we do. You can take this along, do this with your teams on Monday. Come up with as many equations as possible that equal the number 10 using the operators plus, minus, multiply, and divide, and parentheses as often as you want, and using the numbers between 2 and 8 only once per equation. For example, 10 is 2 plus 8. You have 60 seconds time to come up with as many as you can, starting now.
It's actually more fun to do it with your neighbor.
Yeah, it is more fun if you talk in a group. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Did anyone come up with more than 20? Somebody
Yay!
did. Yeah, okay. Good. Do you want to give me your CV afterwards? Okay. So, if your team is really good and they get a lot of practice, extend this. Use things like exponentiation and stuff. So 2 to the third plus 8 minus 6 is also 10. Use things like, I have mathematician friends who start doing integrals and stuff like that with it. This is the type of exercises we do. Let's take another one, okay? This comes from Raven's Advanced Matrices, which is an IQ test. You're going to have 30 seconds to do this one. You're going to see a 3x3 matrix. You're missing one tile. Which one of the 8 choices is the right one? We have to give them time. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You know the answer? Oh, okay. So, Raven's Advanced Matrices you can't get access to. If you want to do it with your team and have fun, next time you're doing a retrospective, just give them this. Give them 5 minutes time. Give them a point for every right answer. Deduct a point for every wrong answer. Okay? Now, negotiation, a very interesting way to do that. This is also what Woolley and colleagues did. They set up their own custom system, but you can use Google Docs or Google Spreadsheets for this one, and give them this, and have them implement this as a team. This is 100 by 100 matrix. Give them 10 minutes time to draw this as a team. Make sure that they don't clash over each other's edits. Right? How do they agree on the color palette? Watch the way they're doing this. Then there's a bunch of other exercises that we do. Give them 90 seconds to take a look at this and see how many words they can memorize as a group. No? Or another one. This is really a nasty one. Give them this one. Give them 90 seconds time to ask the question, which is the most frequent object? Which letter comes most often? Which 2 letters come equally often? And which one comes least? So the most frequent one is A, the least one is J, and N and G come both at the same time. So these are the type of things that we can do. Now, as psychologists, if we're measuring like psychological safety, of course, as psychologists, we're never measuring what you think we're measuring, right? That would take all the fun out of it. So what we're actually measuring is how people are communicating with each other. And this is, for me, I think the best example for practical use of standard deviation. So let's take a look. We have 2 teams. One of them has the guy on the right. So that's the one with the suit standing up there talking. They both are talking 10 minutes each. Both of them have a mean time of talking of 2.5 minutes. But look at the standard deviation here. the wider the standard deviation, the less psychological safety they have. Think about it. The smaller the standard deviation is, the more their times match each other. The larger it is, the more difference you have, the more you have the feeling that there's someone there who doesn't want to speak and someone else who's monopolizing the conversation. Okay? So, some final thoughts. This is the work we do as psychologists. We do this at university. We also do it in our work with our teams. Now, we're very wary about fact and opinion. We're very wary about saying something without being able to prove it. And I would like to pass on to you just this critical thinking, this critical questioning thing. If somebody tells you something about medicine, it's probably a good idea to ask where they did their medical studies. If somebody tells you about something about psychology, it might be a good idea to ask where they did their studies in psychology. And getting back to fact and opinion, this is a man who knew what he was talking about, Hippocrates. Said there are two things, science and opinion. The former begets knowledge, the latter begets ignorance. And take a look, read the research. We're not the only ones doing research on this. There are a couple other scientists who are doing some research on this. Oh, and yeah, these ones are 2, and these ones are 2, and yeah, them, and yeah, they're also doing some research on this. So actually, there are really seriously people who are researching this and not just talking about it. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. We'll get into a few questions here. So the first one's from Jolt. What's the difference between psychological safety and trust?
That's for you.
I know. I also know it's written somewhere in a very, very bright way. So let me rephrase that in my own word. Psychological safety goes a little bit further than trust. So trust is
a prerequisite for psychological safety.
Yes, it's important to have, but psychological safety goes further. It's believing that whatever I say is not held against me in whatever situation. So that's more than I trust you to believe I'm good, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that freedom to be yourself part that you mentioned
Exactly,
earlier.
that freedom of really being myself.
Okay.
This one's from Anonymous.
From Anonymous. In German culture, nearly everyone's an expert. How do you define the term of an expert?
Well, we're not German, so we don't have to. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. Although I would say, 10 minutes of reading at Wikipedia University does not match 10 years and a postgraduate degree at a real university.
Mm-hmm. This one's an interesting one. What is the one word you would ban Agilists?
Do we only get one?
Just one.
Come
Just
on.
one.
Self-organized teams.
Story points.
Do you guys want to expand on that?
I invented story points.
You
it's my fault. I'm doing penance since then.
Ouch.
Yeah.
All right. How do you know there's no relationship between culture and psychological safety? Is there research on this?
It's just a question. Have one of us stated that there is no relationship?
Yes, I did.
You did.
I
Okay.
did say there is no correlation.
Okay.
Yes, there is research on that. A good, if you want a really good summary of the research that has been done, read Edmondson and Lay, I think 2014. The paper that has research on that one is also stated in there. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying there is no correlation at all, but the correlation is very weak. So if you have a culture that promotes psychological safety, it's not sure that your team has psychological safety. So you have to work on that with each and every team.
Yeah. If you read Edmondson and Lay, you can go in and actually get the data, what the Pearson's R correlation coefficient of that is. Just my 2 cents to that. Culture is a derivative emergent property that happens as a result of the self-organization process. So the amount of safety you have in your team, the amount of your safety is part of your culture. So we're looking at things at two different levels.
Okay, this one's interesting. You hear all the time these days, fail often, fail fast, stuff like that. Is enabling and encouraging failure, is that part of psychological safety or part of developing psychological safety?
Well, in her first research, when Amy Edmondson started with medical teams, she had that thought in her head that medical teams would perform better because they would say they perform better, or anybody around them would say they perform better. And she had students sent out to those teams, observing those teams, and the students came back and said, well, the teams that were rated to perform better, they report failure all the time. It's like they're really messed up because they fail all the time and the others don't, but they're not rated to perform that well. So that actually brought her to psychological safety, where she said, well, a team that has psychological safety talks about failure. They say, well, I really messed up here, and that it isn't that, and everybody can learn from that failure. So probably, yes, there is a large combination, but if I just tell people like, okay, now start to report your failure, or ring the failure bell whenever you do something wrong, it's not going to work. You have to work on trust and on that context that teams need in order to do so. And I would also not encouraging you on starting to work on that 3 weeks before you release. That's something you do way before.
Mm-hmm. So it's not we're trying to fail, it's we're trying to be okay
with failing
and treat it as a learning experience.
Yeah.
So, okay.
One last request, since we finished 3 minutes early.
Yes.
And we love it here, and we love you. I'm so happy to be back. We want to do a UE with you. Not a selfie, but a UE. Come on.
Okay, we do
Say
UE.
hi.
So, hands up.
Hands up. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
This is cool.